modular things that hold results in one end and in one part structurally in the XML and the metadata about the procedures that are run to produce the results as part of that test measurement in other containers. And so I'm just going to show you now is the Atterberg limits test container and all the stuff that's in it, and what we can carry in digs. And this is an example for the other tests as well, because certain things are standardized among all the tests, and other things are very unique just to the particular procedures like Atterberg limit. So each column here identifies the thing called a property name, which is effectively the field name. So if you want to talk about the data dictionary, what the field is called, a description of it. Some of these are filled out. Some of these still need to be populated. Others probably won't be populated because they're intuitively obvious. The data type, what type of information that is, and I'll explain a little bit about that. Whether the field is required or not, and this multiple is whether you can have more than one of them. In other words, it's possible in some cases to have more than one of that property in the file. If there's a unit of measurement, what type of units of measurement those are. Hello? What was the laugh about?
Oh, then, sorry.
And then the property type when it comes down to the actual result. So this actually concatenates information from the schema with an external file that holds all of the test results that we're currently managing in digs. And that test results file is one that's easily modifiable as more tests develop, as more test results get generated. We don't need to structurally change the schema. We just add a definition to this file, and then it becomes usable within digs. All right, so the Atterberg limits test, you can have a field description, quality control status, and then a remark. And if you look at this remark property, the type is a thing called a property type. And what that basically means is that it's a complex series of other fields. And in other words, it's sort of like pointing to another table with other information. So when you have a remark about the Atterberg limits test, that remark property type actually consists of a whole series of other fields. The content, which is the actual remark itself, a reference to who made the remark, the author or the actual name of the person as a string, and then the date and time that remark was made. And if you look over here on the remark property, it shows that there are multiple remarks allowed. So you can have multiple of these remark properties on a test. There might be notes or things that come from different folks as tests or as these procedures are done, and that can all be added in this remark property through this remark property type, this chunk of other fields that are here.
Hey Dan.
Yeah.
Hey Dan.
Yeah.
Can you zoom in that Excel spreadsheet so we can see it on the projector? We've got a really small.
Is that better?
We're getting there.
Let's make it big. It looks like you're way behind me in terms of how fast things get. Is this better? I got to scroll up here. Let me.
Yeah, that's readable anyway.
Hey, if I go full screen, that might help too. I don't know if that helps you also. Can you read this now? Is it better, or do you need it bigger?
You can make it a little bit bigger, but that's a whole lot better than it was.
Okay, I think I can add whatever percentage they allow me here. It's the standard thing is, oops. Okay, let's try 300%. It doesn't seem to want to take the number. That's bizarre. Okay, there we go. How's that?
Hey, we can actually see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to scroll up to the top here and just show you. So the first column is the name of the field, effectively the description, the type of data that is, whether it's required field. And you see most fields are actually not required. In fact, you're not required to have a remark. But if you do have a remark, you are required. The remark has to have some content. It has to have some value in it. For example, that's why the required field is yes for the content field of the remark property type. Okay. But again, this is a container that's held within this remark property in DIGS, and as the multiple column says, you can have more than one remark. And this is actually something that's standard for every test procedure, whether it's an in situ test or a lab test. They all allow for all of these fields on top here, or these initial fields are always there. You can always have a remark. You can always have a description. If it's a laboratory test, there are fields that allow you to define the initial specimen conditions. So how the sample was prepared for the test, and also the final specimen conditions if that makes sense for the test type. So triaxial test, for example, you might report on the final volume and final water contents and that sort of thing. So again, this initial specimen conditions is a property type. So there's a whole bunch of fields that are reported for the specimen conditions. And that's what this group here is, the specimen conditions property type. So again, you can even have a remark about that. There's a mandatory reference to the sample. So again, things are modular in DIGS, so that when you talk about a sample or a specimen coming from some place at some depth, that information is recorded elsewhere in the DIGS file. And this sample ref is essentially it's like the foreign key in a database that points to the sample that this lab specimen derives from. The type of specimen is an enumerated list, the specimen type that would identify whether it's an intact specimen, remolded, disturbed, and the like. Specific descriptions about the specimen: it's the dry weight, wet weight, height, diameter, length, width. If it's a cylindrical sample, you would have a diameter value. If it's has a length and a width. If it's a cube sample or a rectangular sample, you would define it there. Its volume, and then for liquid samples, things like the dilution factor and what sort of leachate was made when it was done. And then there's a catch-all property here called other specimen property. And what this is a way to add additional information about the specimen in a way that is searchable and discernible, but doesn't have any specific meaning. So, for example, if you wanted to care about reporting the tear weight, for example, or an initial identifier for a sample container, or some other types of information about the specimen type, you could put it here into this other test property. And that is a parameter property type, which is this piece here. And basically, it has three values. The name of the parameter, so you could say something like, tear ID. The parameter value, which would be the ID of the parameter, say number 2. And then if there are units of measure, you would identify that there. So it's basically a series of name value pairs that could be optionally entered if a particular lab wants to report that information, and it's in a structure in the right place in DIGS, but it doesn't have the parameter name, for example, isn't necessarily controlled, so it doesn't have any. It doesn't have the same type of I shouldn't say value. It's got reporting value, but it's not information that could be readily processed, because there's no guarantee that it's always going to look the same for different users.
Hey, Dan?
But it's a way of reporting additional sorts of things. But for an Atterberg limit test, basically the only thing you really care about is the weight of the sample anyway, for the most part, and that's all that would be filled out. But this is the types of information that every laboratory test specimen can carry, regardless of what is actually done to the specimen. All right.
Hey, Dan,
now we get into the
question.
stuff that's more the metadata about
Dan?
the Atterberg limit
muted?
test. So there's a
Dan?
Boolean,
Can you hear
a true-false field called oven dry.
Hey, Dan, can you hear me?
I'm sorry?
Hey, Dan, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I guess, given the limitation of time, I don't know that we want to go through and talk about all the fields of these tests. I
Right.
think the questions we really had are, for those 5 tests, have we gotten to the point where, you're comfortable we have a field for all the stuff that was on the lab form that Bob gave you, and then
yes.
looking at this data dictionary.
So the question is,
like,
this is how you describe it. The issue is this even going to be, is this something that you could look at or somebody could look at and understand how they would identify stuff on their laboratory form and where it would go in this dictionary?
Right, and I think that's where the question is, that now that we have a table that we can actually read for those 5 tests, hopefully, that maybe it's something that Bob and I and some others can look at those tests and start filling in that definition column there, and
yeah,
making
for ones
sure
that are
we
empty,
can
sure.
understand. Or even the ones that
I
are
can
there.
do that. I
sure
can
we
send those to
understand.
you next, probably in the next day. I could send you a table like this for those 5 tests for you to look at. And you could identify whether those are sufficient or whether there's something else, or you don't know, or there's something you think ought to be reported, you don't know where it ought to go. It's not clear, if that's the case. If it's not clear.
Alan, I see where you're going, and